Are you training hard enough? How much training is too much, and where is your sweet spot for peak performance? You might be thinking, the more training the better. But is that actually true? Whether you want to build strength, power or muscle, in this video I will give you the ultimate strength and conditioning guide for fighters. Training volume is the total amount of work performed over a specific period. It's typically calculated as the product of sets, repetitions and the load used in a specific workout. There are three crucial principles that we have to understand in order to find your sweet spot for your weekly training volume. The minimum effective volume, or MEV, describes the least volume needed to achieve a desired training outcome. Think of it as the lowest volume that still produces a noticeable change. As a fighter, it's also important to determine your maximum recoverable volume, or MRV. This is the upper threshold of your body's ability to recover from training. In other words, it's the maximum amount of training volume that still allows your body to recover and progress. Exceeding this regularly can become counterproductive and lead to symptoms of overtraining. Think of MEV as the spark needed to start a fire and MRV as the limit before you smother it with too much wood. As you plan your training week, consider not just the total volume, but also the density of your training sessions. Training density refers to the amount of work you perform in a certain time period. Imagine two athletes performing the same amount of weekly volume. One crams all sessions into 3 consecutive days, while the other one spreads them out across the week. Their performance and recovery outcomes could differ drastically. Both your minimum effective volume and your maximum recoverable volume depend highly on your experience, fitness level, training schedule, and lifestyle, and they should be explored carefully. Before we look into the practical guidelines, it's important to understand that your combat sports training will affect the overall volume and intensity you can handle. When you're also grappling and striking for hours each week, recovery becomes paramount. With a demanding training schedule, you might want to start with a lower weekly training volume and gradually increase the volume as you observe how your body responds. Quantity should never come at the cost of quality. Now let's look at some general guidelines to determine your weekly training volume based on your goals as well as your fitness level and experience. How should you structure your training week for strength, power, and hypertrophy? Strength is the ability to produce maximum force against external resistance. Research recommends loads of more than 60% of your 1RM for meaningful strength gains. Training with heavier loads at lower volumes is superior to lifting lighter loads at higher volumes. However, lighter loads can be safer to lift while still contributing to strength gains, especially for beginners. If you want to maximize strength as a fighter, perform 3 to 5 reps per set at 80 to 90% of your 1RM. As you approach your maximum strength potential, you will need to train closer to your 1RM to see further gains. Aim for 3 to 4 challenging sets per muscle group per week if you're just starting out. The sweet spot for most intermediate athletes lies between 4 to 6 sets weekly. Advanced athletes can push as high as 6 to 10 sets per week. However, higher volume is also more likely to cause muscle growth, which can be relevant if you're concerned about gaining too much muscle for your weight class. Heavy strength training is fueled in large part by the ATPPC energy system, so rest for 3 to 5 minutes between sets. Power is the ability to produce force quickly. It's the secret behind an explosive knockout or takedown. Velocity-based strength training and plyometric training are great ways to boost power for fighting. Velocity-based strength training focuses on maximizing the speed of lifting rather than just the load. Vary between 50 to 70% of your 1RM depending on the movement. Aim for 3 to 4 weekly sets of 3 to 5 reps as a beginner. Intermediate and advanced athletes can perform 6 to 10 sets per week. The objective is to maintain a high speed throughout all repetitions. Rest as soon as the velocity drops significantly. For plyometric training, beginners should aim for 40 to 50 plyometric ground contacts per joint and muscle group per workout. These can be split across multiple exercises. Intermediates can hit between 50 to 100 reps. Advanced athletes can aim as high as 100 to 150 total ground contacts per session. However, it's crucial to understand that not all plyometric exercises are created equal. The intensity and impact of a depth jump, for example, can be significantly higher than a basic box jump. Adjust the number of sets and reps so that your efforts remain explosive and your form doesn't deteriorate. Plyometric and velocity-based training rely heavily on the ATPPC energy system, so rest for at least 2 to 3 minutes between sets. Muscle growth can be achieved across a wide range of loads and rep ranges. The total training volume and intensity seem to play a more crucial role for hypertrophy. Also, a calorie surplus and a high protein intake are favorable. Hypertrophy can be achieved with as little as 3 to 6 sets per muscle group per week for beginners. For more experienced athletes, the hypertrophy sweet spot lies between 10 to 20 challenging weekly sets. This can be done with a traditional 8 to 12 reps at 60 to 80% of your 1RM, but also higher reps at lighter loads. Some studies suggest a minimum hypertrophy threshold around 30% of your 1RM. Your muscles don't need to fully recover before the next set if your goal is hypertrophy, as long as it doesn't affect exercise form and safety. Workouts can include methods like supersets, trisets, cluster sets, or drop sets, and rest periods can be short. This will be more suitable for advanced athletes and will result in more metabolic stress and consequent muscle soreness. Remember that more total volume is also more likely to cause muscle soreness. Keep this in mind if you don't want DOMs to take away from your technical training as a fighter. Also, remember that larger muscles require more oxygen. If hypertrophy training isn't balanced well with endurance training, you might fatigue faster. If you push too hard for too long with your training, you will reach the point where you hit a wall, or even worse, you burn out or get injured. As you progress through your program, schedule regular deload weeks to prevent plateaus and overtraining and to reduce injury risk. During the deload week, reduce the amount of sets by 40 to 60%, but keep the individual sets challenging. You should also taper down your training volume as you approach a fight in order to peak for the event. As fighters, we need to find a delicate balance between well-rounded strength and conditioning in conjunction with technical training, so we can't look at these guidelines in isolation. You might have heard of block periodization, where athletes focus on one specific training goal like strength or endurance for an extended period before transitioning to the next. This means temporarily sacrificing certain fitness attributes for others. While effective for some sports, this might not be the best approach for fighters who need to perform well during their technical training and stay in fight shape year-round. In many cases, fighters will benefit more from concurrent periodization, where multiple training goals are pursued simultaneously. So what could that look like? For example, you could schedule one weekly full-body hypertrophy workout earlier in the week, where you aim to hit the minimum effective volume for muscle building. In addition to that, you could perform 2 more weekly sessions for strength and power, split into one lower and one upper body workout. During these workouts, you could combine strength training with plyometrics, for example in a superset. Performing a loaded exercise before a plyometric exercise is also known as contrast training. The weight for the loaded exercise should be challenging but not maximal, typically between 70 to 85% of your 1RM. This ensures that the load stimulates neuromuscular activation without causing too much fatigue before the following plyometric effort. Adjust the loaded volume to ensure that you're not overexerting or compromising on the explosiveness of each movement. The immediate switch from strength to power can train the body to recruit fast-twitch muscle fibers more rapidly. This translates extremely well into combat sports, where fighters often have to shift from concentric or isometric efforts into explosive movements. While training stimulates gains, adaptations happen at rest. General guidelines suggest that muscles typically need 48 to 72 hours to fully recover from rigorous workouts, but this recovery timeline is not set in stone. The time required for recovery can vary depending on the intensity and volume, but also individual factors like nutrition, sleep, and genetics. Intense workouts, heavy lifting, or explosive training can also put a significant strain on the central nervous system, or CNS. Even if your muscles feel fresh, you might still feel tired, sluggish, or less reactive if your CNS is fatigued. Stay on the lower end of sets if you're a beginner, since the exercise form is more likely to suffer as you fatigue. Higher training intensities and volumes will also come with longer recovery periods. As a fighter, you should only opt for higher volume if your focus can shift away from skill development and towards maximizing strength, power, or hypertrophy, for example in between training camps. Finding your strength and conditioning sweet spot is crucial not just for your performance, but also your longevity in the sport. Understand your MEV, don't exceed your MRV, and pay attention to how dense your training schedule is. Dial in not just your training volume, but also your recovery to reach your maximum potential. For elite fight performance and recovery, watch this video here next. You will learn the 5 keys to get the most out of your training and peak for your fights. Drop a like and comment if you found this video helpful, and don't forget to subscribe. As always, train hard, recover smart, and fight easy.